Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Full Potential Show. I'm James Rick, and this is your number one non-boring source for personal development. And today on the line, we have Paul Connolly. He's the author of Against All Odds. Paul is a celebrity personal trainer in the UK, and he still regularly features on TV and in the media. He helps people to lose weight, core condition, and speed sculpt their way to a fitter, healthier lifestyle. Paul just mentioned to me that he's actually, they're doing a movie on his bio as we speak for Channel 4 TV there in the UK. Paul, thank you so much for being on today's Full Potential Show.
Nice to speak to you, James. Nice to speak to you.
Well, let's dive in and talk a little bit about what it means to have basically done what you've done against all odds. I understand you had a bit of a crazy story, so let's start there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was brought up in children's homes. I'm trying not to use any slang, so you don't need to use subtitles. I was born in London, in East London, and I was brought up in children's homes, in care homes in London, and we had a lot of child abuse as a child, and quite a tough time. Was involved with gangsters, and didn't really find myself till I got to about sort of early 30s. Had quite a horrific life, but I couldn't read or write until I was about 24, 25.
Wow.
And people say, how did you write a book, Paul? It's called a ghostwriter. Yeah, I mean, I've had quite a horrific life, but at the same time, I consider myself quite a lucky guy. So most of the guys who grew up with me are not here anymore. They're dead or, died in one way or another. So, I've been very...
Can you give me, some specific examples? I mean, I understand that it was rough and, you started out in these rough circumstances, but just to kind of capture the essence of what it means to live that kind of rough life, what are some of the stories that you have?
Well, I was born into an Irish Catholic family, and, it's against religion to use contraception, so I was one of 8. I was the 7th boy, and... at 2 weeks old, I was put out with the rubbish. My mother had a breakdown, put me out with the dustbins, out with the trash, and I was taken into care and looked after by nuns till I was about 8. Then I moved to a bigger children's home where it was run by a paedophile ring. The care home was run by a paedophile ring, and of the 8 boys that grew up in my dormitory together, there's me and only one other guy still alive.
What was it? It was called a what?
The children's home that I was in was a care home that held 300 children.
Oh.
And it was run by a paedophile ring, which...
Oh, okay. A pedophile ring.
Pedophile, yeah, sorry, yeah.
No, I know. We got the UK American translation. Okay.
So, in my dormitory, like in the bedrooms that we slept in, there was 8 boys, and me and one other guy is still alive. The 6 of them committed suicide.
Oh, wow.
In either jumping on railway tracks and heroin overdoses, and we're talking about driving the car off of cliffs and self-destructive because we were physically, sexually and mentally abused from very young ages.
And how long did this go on for, Paul?
Well, I was lucky. I was one of the lucky ones. I didn't go to this particular care home until I was 8. So I was considered an older boy. And a lot of my young guys that grew up with me were there from the ages of 2 and 3. So they were abused as babies. So they didn't have a chance. So
wow.
I was there from 8 till 18. And
you were there for 10 years.
10 years, yeah. Yeah. And... when I got to 35, I'd been quite successful. I'd trained Elle Macpherson. I've been over to the States. I trained quite a lot of people in California, quite a lot of big names as a trainer. I was the first personal trainer in the City of London in 1989. So I've been around a long time. I mean, I'm 50 next year. So
no.
Yeah.
Seriously? Because when you're saying early 30s, I'm thinking you look like you're in your early 30s right now. What, 50?
No. Yeah. So
that's incredible.
I mean,
what do you attribute to that? I mean, other than this extreme physical shape that you're in, I mean, diet, just kind of the standard diet, exercise, the basics.
Yeah, I mean, I was a professional. I was a professional fighter in London for a few years, and I won all the amateur titles. But I had a very serious accident where I fell off a roof, and you might be able to see that, I cut my hand in half down the middle and severed my arm off. That's when I trained to become a personal trainer, because but I had to first learn to read and write first, James, because I was illiterate, because we were neglected. We weren't just mentally, physically and sexually abused, we were also neglected, we were starved, and we had no education to speak of. So trying to learn to read and write at 24 years old to then study to be a trainer was really tough.
It's really difficult for me to even fathom it, Paul. And I mean, wasn't there any regulation on this? I mean, being in this home, didn't they have any kind of auditing that was going on to make sure that this is not going on?
Well, we had what we call social workers that came in every 6 months, and they asked us if we were okay, and they took some notes. But these social workers, these interviews were done within the same room as the abusers. So obviously we were never on our own. Also, the hospital was on site. The sick bay was on site. So I mean, on numerous occasions, we didn't ever go to outside hospitals. We were treated on site. So
there was they were keeping all that information in. They knew how to do it.
And it was in the 60s and 70s, and the regulation was terrible. I mean, I've had a payout from my childhood was worth £20,000 according to the governing bodies here. They paid me out now. The families of the dead kids only got £24,000, and that's what our lives were worth, apparently. You know, because when I was 35, there was a massive court case, and it all came out over here. Similar at the same time as a lot of the abuse cases came out with the Catholic Church in Ireland and in London. That's basically when it all happened here as well. And we went to the Old Bailey, which is the biggest court in London. I don't know, it's like the highest court in London. My house father, who used to abuse me daily, got 14 years in prison. But a lot of the abusers got off because the police lost video evidence and they got away with it. So
amazing.
I did follow. I mean, at the time I was an angry young man, and I did follow a lot of these people for 3 days, and I was actually going to end some of their lives myself. But a friend of mine gave me the movie Sleepers. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, and it's a very similar story to my life story. These guys never learned their lesson. They killed their abusers, but they didn't ever change as individuals, so they all ended up dead or in prison, and so there was never any happy ending for these guys. So. You know,
so I mean, that really changed your life then, because you were going down that track.
I used to do security work in this country for nightclubs, and I was a bodyguard as well. And I was arrested for I had an altercation with 5 men one night, and I was arrested and I hurt 2 of these guys quite badly. And I was arrested on what we called, I don't know what you'd call it in the States, but it's called GBH and GBH with intent, which is some serious charges, and I was looking at 5 years in prison. Hasten to add quickly, I was found not guilty, and I was found to use reasonable force. But that was a changing point in my life when I was found not guilty by a jury and said that, you know, it wasn't my fault, because when I grew up in care, I was always told I was Irish trash and I was going to be dead or in prison by the time I was 40, you know, so or 30. Wow. So you know,
well, I mean. I think what's so amazing here and why it's so appropriate, the title of your book, Against All Odds, is that, you know, many people I have on the show, especially coming from psychological backgrounds and stuff, they talk about the importance of, you know, the imprint of, say, when you're 0 to 7 or as a child and even into adolescence, how these early structures are being formed in our brains that will create the foundation for the rest of our lives. And you're saying that this went on, that these impressions were made repeatedly over and over again for a period of decades, to the point where, you know, you literally started your life, like a new life, when you were in your early 30s.
I didn't mature until I never matured as an individual until I hit my late 30s. I now have 2 boys, a 7-year-old, a 2-year-old. I've done everything late, and it's because I didn't mature. And it's because you know, it's almost like my life started again. And what made it why I was so lucky was because I didn't go to this particular abusive place until I was 8. So up to 8 years old, I was brought up by nuns, and I wasn't abused. It was
So,
my
I mean,
abuse.
you think, I mean, basically because your life wasn't exposed to it at an earlier age, that is a significant
That's
part
why
of your survival story?
That's why I haven't committed suicide like everybody else.
Wow.
Because I had 8 good years.
And do you think that allowed you to see that there is good in the world, or at least build some basic social structure in the way that you operate in the world that allowed you to survive?
I think so. I think at 8 years old, you develop your mindset is developed almost for life. I think if I'd have been abused from a very young age, as my young friends were in the children's home that I grew up with, I wouldn't be here either. I think it's just that I was brought up in a convent until I was 8, and the nuns did not abuse me. Whereas when I went to this particular home, the abuse was rife.
And now this other individual that was still alive after all this time, did he get there late as well? I mean,
he's doing 3 life sentences as we speak.
Did he take it out on his abusers? I mean, he went and hunted them down, like.
No, I did that. He basically went on and to do lots of armed robberies and you know, he became, you know, he went where I did for an extent. I was involved with a lot of gangsters and did a lot of naughty stuff in my time. I always had this inherent sense of what was right and what was wrong, and I've never done anything in my life that I'm ashamed of. I've never bullied anybody. I've never. I mean, it's a long, you know, it was a long process, but I became an angry young man, and I had a death wish for a few years myself, where I'd been bullied my whole life and abused my whole life. And finally, the worm turns, and then you lash out at everybody else. And I can remember on numerous occasions being in bare knuckle fist fights for money and looking into the other guy's eyes and knowing that I'm willing to die here. I've got nothing to live for. And once somebody looks into your eyes and they can see you're willing to die, you've already won that fight, you see, because now I couldn't do that. I've got 2 boys, I've got a loving wife, I've got a nice home, I've got a successful business, I've got good friends. You know, I couldn't do that now, but the man I was back then,
you had nothing to lose.
Nothing to lose, and a lot of anger and a lot of hate, you know, because eventually if you just keep kicking a dog, they'll turn around and bite you, won't they? So,
well, help me understand what you did to make that switch from all this anger and all this hate. I mean, obviously it was more than the movie. Maybe that was that helped you to kind of see where that path led. But I mean, really, you don't seem like, you know, it's even there anymore. Like you've just kind of worked through it, and I think it's critical to understand what process you went through for anybody that's watching right now that has gone through tough situations in their past, and they want to let go of that hate and bitterness that's just eating them up inside.
I had 2 or 3 turning points in my life. The first one was when I was in Crown Court awaiting a 5-year prison sentence, when I was running a particular door. When I don't know if what you call it in the States, but I was running a security company. I was a bodyguard, and I had a lot of guys who worked for me. And I got into a situation where 5 guys attacked me, and in order for me to survive and stay alive, I had to really hurt 2 of them badly. And I was arrested, and I was told my whole life that I was going to prison. So I had a week at court. The jury went out for 1 hour only and come back in, and they found me not guilty. And it was a very emotional time for me, because I was told that when you're told your whole life that you're a low-life scum and you're going to prison, and it doesn't happen, a light goes off in your head. You're like, I was so convinced I was going to hear the word guilty when they charged me, when the jury come back in, or I didn't hear the word not. So the only realization I had was that I wasn't going to prison, was that I could hear everybody cheering in the gallery, and then I realized that they'd said not guilty on the 3 serious accounts. I was looking at least 5 to 10 years in prison, and that was a massive turning point in my life. When I walked out of that court, I never dealt with any of the gangsters in here again. I had nothing to do with any of those people again. I didn't do any security work again. I basically, that was a massive turning point in my life, because I was told that was me going to prison. That was where I was meant to go. I've been told that my whole life.
And so now you had evidence that challenged this program that you as a child, you don't know what not to believe. You just believe what is programmed into you, and you're like, well, they say I'm going to prison. They say I'm a dirtbag, a lowlife, whatever. So I'm accepting that program, but then you had your first evidence that they could be wrong and that they were wrong, because at that moment you decided for yourself what you wanted and that their program was false. And I mean, there's just so beautiful of a transition point right there.
It was massive. And then 6 months after that, the police were knocking on my door and they said that we've arrested all of these people that brought you up and we've charged them with child abuse. And we're opening a massive case called Operation Mapperton that takes over, which covers most of London and the abuse that's gone in London. And we need you to give evidence in the Old Bailey as a victim. And that was another massive turning point in my life, because I got to stand in the court and say to the man who abused me as a child, you're the bad guy, not me, and you're going to prison for 14 years, and I'm not. So again, you know, another massive turning point.
Did that give you closure?
No, because what actually gave me closure was 3 of the members of staff that were chief abusers got off with 18 months in prison on remand because that the police lost vital video evidence. So I got myself a Browning, a handgun, and I followed them for 3 days.
Did they know you were following them?
No, they didn't even know what I looked like. We're talking about me at 36 years old, 35 to 36 years old, and last time they saw me, I was a 19-year-old kid.
Yeah.
The trouble was they were all in different parts of London, and I knew I had to kill them all in one day, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to get them all. And I was seeing a shrink at the time, and I was also I'd made a really good friend who's a very different guy to me, and I was getting a lot of advice from these people, and they were saying to me, I thought it's my responsibility as the only one still left alive to go and put one in the back of each one of these people's heads and to end their lives, just to say to these...
It was a duty. You felt like you had to do that in honor of the people that they had hurt.
Yeah. And these kids were like my brothers. We grew up together from young age, you know, and I thought it was my duty to... And that was the last turning point for me, because I was given the movie Sleepers, which and the moral of the story of the movie Sleepers is that you can kill your abusers, you can get your revenge, but if you don't change yourself as an individual, then you're still going to end up in prison or dead, and nothing changes, you know. So my good friend of mine said, please just watch this, and the shrink I was seeing was very good, and he basically gave me a lot of good advice. But I had a dilemma for about 3 days, to the point where I was at home and I ended up putting the gun in my own mouth, cocking the hammer, because the agony was, I didn't know what to do.
You were conflicted because you had made this decision to do one thing, and then now you had conflicting information to do another thing. And I can imagine that. I mean, I can't possibly imagine what it would be like to be in that situation, but I can feel, you know, the anguish that you would go through in that type of situation. So ultimately, that boiling process, though, led to the outcome of the life that you're now living. I mean, even though I mean, we're talking about intensity beyond intensity of, you know, like reformations happening in the brain, but out of that, rather than killing yourself and rather than killing them, somehow you arrived at this positive conclusion. What did you start doing? I mean, did you change the questions you were asking yourself? Did you come up with a different image in your mind of what you wanted your life to be like? What ultimately do you think led you to the outcome that you're now realizing in your life?
See, my theory is this, that you are born inherently good or inherently bad. And it's not as black and white as that, obviously. I was actually born a good person. My circumstances I was born into was beyond my control. And I feel that you're either good or you're bad. You're either somebody who cares about other people, you're somebody who has a conscience, or you're not. And the circumstances you're born into are irrelevant. And I'm not saying I wouldn't have the ability to kill somebody, but to kill somebody in cold blood and to know that I then end my own life because of that. is very tough. It's a very tough thing to do. But at the same time, to this day, and we're talking about 15 years, I still have guilt that I didn't do it, because I still feel that it was my responsibility. But I drove into the East End of London, and I was starting to mix with the bad guys again, and I got the gun and everything, and I basically got to the point where it was like the devil was on this shoulder. Fella. If I had done it, I wouldn't be having my little guys like this looking up. This is Harley.
Hello, Harley.
And he's 7.
Hello.
He's 7.
Wow.
And he's my apple of daddy's eye. Where's your brother?
He's a cute kid.
You better go to bed, it's late.
What, where's Archie?
Yeah, give me a kiss.
He's in the car.
Dad's right in the middle of an interview, so you better give me a
He
kiss.
isn't in the car.
Where's Archie? Oh no, Archie's staying at Nanny's. Yeah. No.
Okay.
No. Yeah, so, I mean...
Did you know that was the path that you wanted to go down? That you knew you were going to have a family and a wife? Could you foresee that at all?
Not at the time,
Then
no.
what stopped you then?
What stopped me at that point was the fact that I was almost leading a double life. I was training celebrities in the City of London. I was starting to become a well-known trainer in London. I was starting to be successful. I was being flown out to the Caribbean to train wealthy clients. I was starting to become a name in the fitness industry, and I could see the potential for my future. So I had on this half of my head saying, you've got a future, and on the other half of my head saying, you owe this to your brothers. You know your future's not important.
Wow.
And this dilemma, but I was surrounded by good people who were giving me good advice, and it took me 3 days. And for 3 days, I was walking around with a loaded gun in my, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And to the point where I was about 3 foot from one of my abusers, and I had the gun cocked with the safety off, and I was just going to pop him in the back of the head. And that would have been, once I'd started, I wouldn't have been able to stop. But I got to the point where I was sitting in my own house, and it sounds melodramatic, but tears streaming down my face. I shoved the gun in my hand, pulled the hammer, and I was crying, and the blood dripping out my mouth where I'd knocked one of my teeth out when I'd pushed the gun into my mouth. And it would have been so easy just to pull the trigger and end that agony, you know, that dilemma was so hard for me. But to the point where even today, I feel some days I did the wrong thing. I know it's hard. You know, I've got 2 lovely boys, a lovely wife, a nice home. You know, I just made Trainer of the Year in Europe last year. You know, I'm by fitness professionals, a governing body. I'm very successful at what I do, and I've got a great life. But we all have our demons. You know, this stuff never goes away.
Does it feel like it's demon driven? Does it feel like you owed it, like obligation to these? Was it more of that? I mean, in other words, did you feel like it was an evil thing, or did you feel like it was a duty thing? It was an obligation, or a bit of both?
I felt it's more like an obligation. I felt like if I don't do this, nobody will. It's part of the reason why I wrote the book, because by writing the book, I've made a lot more sense out of what I've done, and it's made a lot more sense to me as to why I did what I did, and how I did it, and how I've evolved. Because the trouble with growing up in children's homes is that you have no role models, you have no one to teach you anything. I teach my kids everything. You know, no one ever taught. I got run down 3 times as a kid by a bus, by a car, by a motorbike. I didn't even know how to cross a road, you know, because nobody teaches you anything. And, you know, I couldn't. And if you've got no role models, you've got no sense of identity, you've got no one teaching you anything, then you develop so much slower than somebody who has that, you know, the files. You know, even now, I'll struggle to spell, and I'll struggle to read and write, because those files have been deleted from my brain. You know, when I should have learned it, I didn't learn it. So, you know, people say to me, I can't understand how you're so successful with your background, but it's a frame of mind. It's a frame of mind. My frame of mind now is that, you know, every day to me is a gift. Every day I live in paradise. I mean, it's hard for you to see where I live, but I live in a nice neighbourhood. You know, I've got nice green lawns. I've got nice neighbours. I mean, I come from hell. So every day to
sounds
me,
like it. Paul, just to kind of sum up as we wrap up here, what you've gone through and what some of the key ideas are that we could pull away from this.
Sure.
I think firstly, it's recognizing the importance of the environment that you're in, especially at an early age. So anybody who's watching, first of all, needs to recognize the importance of the role of being a parent.
Absolutely.
Or being a role model, especially if they're serving children, whether they're in schools or, or they are running a home. The importance of that early model is so important to the outcome of that life. I mean, statistically, you should have ended up in jail, ended up dead, but you made some choices internally along the way that carried you on a different path to the outcome that you're now realizing now. But it sounded like it was a hairline away from being the other outcome. It could have been one juror could have looked at it one way and persuaded everybody. It could have been, pulling the trigger when you were 3 feet behind one of your abusers. There was those hairline moments when it could have gone either way. But now, obviously, it's a completely different track than the other ones. But it was the choices that you made in the absence of having the role models that you needed in early life. So I think, one, recognizing the importance of the environment and the early role models and the influence it has on a child. And two, recognizing, like you said, the inherent good in yourself, that you knew you were a good person and that you ultimately would need to make positive choices and not end your life. And then three, having something to live for.
Absolutely.
Having something of value to live for.
And the role model thing is so valuable because I've got two boys and I would never behave in a bad way in front of my boys because I want them to be something I was never. I never was. I want them to be like good men, to grow up to be good people. And if I don't set that example, they just won't be. But just on that point, as I grew up, although I started to box, you see, and Muhammad Ali was my role model growing up as a child because I couldn't have a physical role model in my life. Right. I chose a famous one. Mm-hmm. And the first guys that I met that wasn't trying to bugger me or abuse me were boxing coaches and whose families fed us, who actually took pity on us, So some of it's luck along the way. If you're lucky, if you meet someone who takes pity on you, or somebody who wants to abuse you again. I mean, there is an element of luck.
That randomness, and especially in early life, because you didn't choose the abuse. I mean, at least in this life, you didn't choose the abusers that would dominate your life for 10 years. And it is a bit of a luck of the draw, as it appears. For example, that many people didn't have to go through that, and the fact that you made it through that and that you've been able to mature to the level that you are now, I think gives you a window into an experience that many other people wouldn't have, that with the character that you are now, with the knowledge and the skills that you developed, I mean, you're going to have an incredible impact on so many lives that have gone through that experience and maybe didn't have anybody that could relate to it because most of them were dead or got in trouble or whatever. But here you are now, as what a fantastic model, not only to your children, but to other children that might watch this movie that's now coming out, that otherwise would not be able to say, nobody's going to relate to this. Nobody knows what I went through. They can give me all the advice in the world, but unless they went through it, they can't really understand who I am and what I went through. But you're giving them that link. And I think that's a big part of the reason why you did, from a universal kind of source or direction. I think that's why you are where you are. You are that person that can influence these lives in a positive direction. And
I work in London in London with school kids now, and we go in and we teach kids to box. We've got a company called Sweet Science, and these kids can't even read and write. The same as they're me. And they say to me, "What do you know?" And then when I tell them, all of a sudden they're listening to me. Their ears prick up, and they because they truly don't believe that they can have a good life. They believe that their life is over before it's begun, and it's that self-belief. It's the self-belief that yes, I'm better than this. I may not be getting an education. I may not have an education. I may not have had any decent role models, but I know that I'm better than this, and I know that I'm destined for better things. And it's an attitude. It's a frame of mind.
Well, and you giving them that tiny spark they can feed on that now. Long after you leave, once that seed is planted, all they needed was that one seed that could touch on the goodness that's inherent inside them to start nurturing and growing it. Well, I remember what Paul said, and now I'm going to feed that plant. That's a new belief that you can nurture no matter what kind of environment you're in. So again, Paul, just phenomenal stuff, and so glad to have you on the Full Potential Show today to share your experience with us. Where can people learn more about what you're doing? And also, I know you're doing a lot of training there in the UK. So, and I saw you walking around earlier. You are in incredible physical shape, and you look extremely young for your age. So, where can people follow you and what you're doing and what you recommend as far as physical health and training goes?
Well, I have a YouTube site. It's Essex Training. If you put Paul Connolly Essex Training into YouTube, I've got about 60 workouts on YouTube that people can check out. Boxing workouts, core stability pro workouts, and my book is available on Amazon in the US. Against all odds, and that's available.
Is that your child there on the cover?
That's me as a child.
Oh my gosh, he looks just like your kid. Yeah.
Exactly the same. Yeah. That's
Oh
Harley.
my
That was my 7-year-old. So that was this is selling. This is sold about 10,000 copies in the UK, but it's just gone on sale on Amazon Amazon US, and some of my friends in New York and my friends in California bought it on Amazon US, and they're putting reviews up on Amazon for me over there. So
Paul, an incredible story against all odds. You can get that on Amazon, and if you're interested in training with Paul, that's Essex Training, ESSEXTRAINING.com, and you can even train at home because you got all the YouTube videos up on there. So Paul Connolly, Paul, thank you so much for being on today's Full Potential Show. Just an incredible story.
Thanks for talking to me, James. It's been great.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Paul. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, that concludes this week's episode of the Full Potential Show, your #1 non-boring source for personal development. I'm James Rick, and if you want to get more positive programming for your brain absolutely free on a weekly basis, just visit fullpotential.com.
If you like the Full Potential Show, you're going to love the Full Potential Club. What would you like most as a Full Potential Club member? Be 2 to 3 times more productive? Do what you're passionate about? Have more energy? Reduce your work hours? Travel the world? Enjoy an amazing lifestyle on a frugal budget? What if you could do them all? James Rick has been there and done it in ways that few people have. For anyone serious about taking their life or business to the next level, you know you've got to do more than just watch. You've got to do. Join James Rick and other like-minded people for an incredible $10 a month at fullpotential.com/club. Be educated. Be empowered. Be the best version of you. fullpotential.com/club. Try it free for 30 days.